Welcome to Zen and the Art of Self-Publishing. It's the podcast where we slow down, get honest, and put the human back at the center of author life. I'm your host, Janet Margot, so come on in and let's talk. Hey, it's Janet. Before we get into today's episode, I want to be upfront with you about something. This is a conversation from my archives. It was recorded before the show existed. It was a conversation that I had with my writing and publishing partner, Victoria Dougherty, but we were actually in discussion with another author, Poornima Manco. I've been sitting on it because I didn't want it to disappear into my hard drive somewhere. It really deserved a home. When I think about this show, it's not just about the tactics, it's not the ads, it's not the algorithms, it's really about the human why underneath it all. And this conversation kept coming back to me because not every author is trying to write a 20-book series. There's a whole spectrum of what you can do as a self-published author. People have different reasons why they're writing. And I think this episode sits on that other end of a genre series writer. So our guest today is Poornima Manco. She's a novelist whose short stories have appeared in the UK in The Guardian and The Telegraph. She was born and raised in India, has lived in London for 30 years, and that experience of straddling the two worlds, the East and West, the old home and the new, it runs through everything she writes. In this conversation, we talk about identity, about belonging, about adventure, of course, about what it actually costs to build a creative life along everything else that life demands of you. And then we end up somewhere where I really didn't expect, in a really beautiful conversation about love. Her love story is really incredible, and I think you're going to love her. Here's Poornima. Victoria, do you want to kick off today? I'm going to kick off with caffeine.
I do want to kick off because what I'm most interested in is, you're a flight attendant and you talk about travel and you talk about kind of the intersection of travel with your work and how you approach it. And that's really what I want to start talking about, because here we are, the three of us, we're all sitting in three different cities.
That's right.
In different ways, we all travel quite a bit,
Yes.
and we're all adventurers. Nobody who becomes a flight attendant isn't an adventurer.
Absolutely. Yes,
I mean, really, and nobody who was willing to live outside of their birth country isn't an adventurer. This is something that that we share apart from being writers. So I guess I would really love to hear your perspective.
Well, there's two aspects to that. One, that I've always been a reader. So I've done the armchair traveling through my books. And whilst I was growing up in Delhi, I didn't travel quite as much. I always wanted to, but all we ever did was travel from my home city of birth, Delhi, to down south where my mother came from. And that was the extent of my travel. But somewhere within me, there was always this desire to see the world.
Where in the South?
So
where in the South?
My mother grew up in a place called Chennai. It used to be known as Madras. Yes. Yeah. But has been renamed Chennai. But again, there's a history there. She wasn't really Tamilian. She was actually from Kerala. So I am a half
South.
Yes. And I'm a mongrel. I'm half South Indian and half North Indian. My father's from the north, my mother's from the south. So funnily enough, I straddled those two worlds as well while growing up in Delhi. And so that was the extent of my travel, from Delhi to Chennai to back again. It was only later, as I was growing up, and one of my uncles, my maternal uncles, flew for Air India. And I just thought his life was so exciting. I mean, one day he was in Berlin, the other day he was in Tokyo, and another time he was somewhere in Cape Town or wherever. And I thought, my goodness, how exciting. Now, for a girl like me growing up in Delhi, and, in a very middle-class family, we didn't have a lot of money. That was the only way. That was my sort of ticket to travel, my passport to travel, if you will, which was joining the airlines. Again, I had been a reader, I had been a writer, but I put all of that on the back burner, and I really sort of went for it, applied for different airlines, got rejected by several, and eventually ended up flying with Delta for 2 years. And I was still based out of Delhi because back in the day, they had bases all over the world. And then when Delta decided to shut shop in India, this opportunity to fly with a different airline came along, and I took it. And then I was offered the choice of moving to Hong Kong or to London, and I chose London. And I have lived there ever since. And it's been a great journey. It really has been a wonderful journey. I've learned so much about myself, so much about the world, so much about people. And all of those things I have been able to use in my writing.
When did you start to really get committed to writing in your adulthood? Like once you were kind of well into your career, like when did that come about?
So I seriously started to write in 2018. But
Oh,
prior
wow.
to
Okay.
that, I used to dabble in writing. I'd write for a few competitions here and there, and it was more of a creative outlet, nothing that I'd taken
Yeah.
very seriously. Up until the point that a very dear friend, a childhood friend, sent me a link to a competition in the Guardian newspaper, which is a UK newspaper. And it's called the Summer Short Story Challenge, where a lot of famous writers were sending in their works, and a lot of people, like ordinary people, sent in their works. And mine was shortlisted, and it was a runner-up. And that's when I thought, oh, maybe I can do something with this. Maybe I can, start to write more frequently, maybe submit to more competitions. And I did that, and that carried on for a while. That was back in 2009. That carried on for a while. I'd write for a few competitions, get rejected, get selected, place somewhere, not place in other places. And then
Right.
in 2018, I've heard about indie publishing. And that's where my interest was piqued. And I started to make inquiries about how to go about it, how to publish in this manner, because frankly, I didn't have the energy, the time to go looking for traditional deals. And this seemed perfect. This
Hmm.
seemed like, okay, at least I can get my work out there. Whether or not it sells, that's a different story, but at least I can get it out there. So
Right.
that's where the journey began.
And do you find that um you can write when you're traveling, like when you're
On a
on an
layover,
assignment, like a flight?
yes, I mean, that is the time when I can shut out the world. I can sit in my room and I can focus. I get the most of my writing done on my layovers, ironically enough. Not so much at home
Oh,
because,
wow.
you know, yeah, there's so much else going on at
Life,
home, and I've got
family.
kids and
Yeah.
I've got a family and, all of those commitments. But on a layover, I have no commitments to anyone. So I can sit in my hotel room and I can write. And I do that regularly, religiously.
I have to say, I have massive envy right now. I mean, because one of the things that I love to do, like, even though, I'm single, I live alone now in a different country, not in my home country, but still, when up to a certain point in what I'm writing, there's nothing I like more than to leave my home and just check into a hotel somewhere and focus on that.
It's almost like getting into a bathtub because even if you're at home and even if your children are still smaller, but I'm a new empty nester and Janet's a relatively new empty nester. So, and even with like the kids out of the house, there still feel like there are obligations. Whereas when you're in a hotel, it is really like a
Exactly.
bathtub. You know,
Exactly.
you're in the bathroom, you have closed the door, and nobody is going to disturb you. This is kind of like a funny question, but when I really think about my themes, like the things that I always return to in my writing, no matter what genre I'm writing in, no matter, it could be about witches, it could be about the Cold War, whatever. But I realize that one of the things that I always write about is I'm trying to answer the question, what would you do if the worst possible thing happened to you?
Ah,
It's a huge theme that just kind of bubbled up for me. What are the
right.
things that bubble up for you all? Well, Janet, I think I know some of the things that bubble up for you as well, and you probably could think of a few things that bubble up for me. But Poornima, what bubbles up for you where you
So
realize, oh my God, I keep returning to this, you know?
it's funny you should say that, because I have noticed that in my writing, there is this theme that I keep returning to, which is trying to find my place in the world through my characters, through my protagonists.
Mm.
And of course, one of the important things is that I lived the better part of my life in India. So I was used to a certain culture and I grew up in a certain kind of environment. And then I moved to the West. And there is definitely a difference between living in the East and living in the West. And I did find it quite hard in the beginning to fit in. Where do I belong? What do I represent? Who am I, in this new environment, in this new culture? Now, I have lived in the UK for 30 years, so I have found my feet here now, but I still remember those moments of not understanding the subtext, or standing
Yeah.
apart in a playground because I'm not sure where I fit in to the mum cliques, those sorts of things. And so I think there's always this kind of searching for who am I truly and what do I stand for? What are my values and how have they changed, depending on my environment and my circumstances? What And what is my journey ahead? And how do I straddle these two worlds? How do I bring them together? So those are themes I keep repeating in my works through the women that I write about. And I think a lot of it also, talking about when you said, what is the worst thing that could happen to you? One of the worst things that could happen to me did happen to me this year, which was waking up one morning being partially deaf in one ear, which just came out of the blue, you know? And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I am at this moment handicapped in that sense because I have lost 80% of my hearing in my right ear. Um, and it was this very
Do you,
tough thing to cope with.
and it
Sorry.
was simply out of the blue. Like there was nothing
No,
that
there was no lead up to
preceded it.
it. There was no lead up to it. We had gone away for a weekend to Prague, I believe your home place. We had gone away to Prague and we came back, my husband and I went to bed. Perfectly normal. Everything was great, fine. Woke up the next morning and the whole room was spinning. I had terrible vertigo. I had terrible balance issues. And this carried on for a while. I was diagnosed with various things till finally I managed to see a specialist who said I had something called sudden sensory neural hearing loss, which meant I had lost 80% of my hearing. And no one could tell me why. They said it was idiopathic. It could be a virus. It could be, my autoimmune attacking itself. And I was devastated because I didn't know what this meant for me, how my life would proceed from this point on, because I was used to being very independent. And particularly as a flight attendant, you have to be, you're traveling to different
Yeah.
places and you pretty much are taking care of yourself. And suddenly I could barely walk down the stairs without support, or somebody had to always be in the house if I took a shower just in case I fell. So that
Hmm.
was quite a journey. And what I realized during that time was it was a roller coaster. I went through the ups, the downs, the lows, everything. But I came out the other end feeling much more resilient and feeling like it hasn't diminished me. I've learned from it. I've learned that I am a lot stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. Life carries on. It has to carry on. So when terrible things happen to people, one can either give up and sit down and say, oh, that's it. I'll never do another thing again. Or you say, no, okay, how do I navigate this now? And that's what I've tried to do.
How's that changed your life now?
Well, I wear a hearing aid and I wear it when I go to work. And at times I find it tricky because I have unilateral hearing loss. So that means if I was wearing a hearing aid in both ears, then they would sync between themselves and I'd be able to hear things better. But because my one ear is perfectly fine, very sharp, and the other ear is the one that receives all the sounds in this very tinny quality, my
Yeah.
brain finds it harder to try and distinguish between the sounds. And at times it gets very tired and very confused with all the stimuli that it's receiving. But I've been okay. I've been able to fly fine. And now and again I'll get an episode of vertigo, but I've learned to handle that. I've learned to do something called the
Yeah.
Epley maneuver on my own, which is sort of
Yeah.
repositioning the crystals in my ear. So
Yeah.
yes, it's been quite a learning curve this year, but I'm fine. I'm mobile, I'm working, I'm able to go to the gym. I'm doing everything that I did prior to this. And the only thing is that I can't
Do
hear
you,
very well. That's it.
do you ever, you know what it sounds like? I don't mean to be reductive in what I'm about to say. It almost sounds like, so I'm living in Mexico City now. I'm
Okay.
not completely fluent in Spanish and I have to focus so much when I'm listening to people, especially if they're talking fast or
Yes.
talking with a dialect that I haven't heard before because there's so many different dialects. My brain just gets so exhausted. Sometimes it's just
Yeah.
fried and I have to
That's right.
stop the conversation, or if I have the privilege of doing so. Do you ever feel like you just have to kind of take the hearing aid out and just
Oh,
yield?
frequently.
Okay.
In fact, I love my alone time more now because the sort of job I'm in, this, the sort of
Yes.
job I'm in,
Well,
I'm dealing with people all the time. And, there's this constant sort of assault on all my senses. So that time when I get to my room at the hotel and I
oh
shut
my
the
God,
door,
it's so precious.
it's so precious.
It's so funny. I mean, not to make light of it, but my father-in-law had a tremendous amount of hearing loss because he'd been a World War II Marine. And so he lost his hearing because of, explosions and
Yes,
things like that.
yes.
But he was a father of 7 girls and 1 boy. My husband is the only boy in the family. And he had a very challenging marriage. He would just take out his hearing aids and it was bliss for him.
I'm
My
sure.
He
godfather's
just
like that.
sit there.
I'm sure. And
My godfather's like that, and I think that's why their marriage has lasted so long between him and my godmother.
For sure.
there's
For
advantages
sure.
to there are advantages to everything. When you talk about selective hearing, 9 times out of 10 it's always the men,
Oh my
the men
God.
who have the selective hearing. But now I can do that too. I can have that selective hearing. So if my kids are squabbling or if my husband's saying something and I don't want to respond, I'm like, oh, I just didn't hear it. I just didn't hear
I'm
you.
so sorry. No idea.
Exactly. So there's always silver linings.
You said you were choosing between Hong Kong and London. And now I certainly understand why you would choose London, but like what was that thought process like? Was it like
So ironically,
were
I
you
chose Hong
tempted by
Kong.
Hong Kong?
I chose Hong
Oh,
Kong.
okay.
I chose Hong Kong to begin with. And the
Oh.
reason was that a very dear friend of mine who had started to fly for Cathay a year prior, and she said to me, come join me in Hong Kong because you know what, we'll have a blast. We'll 2 single girls, we'll have a good time. My parents were not happy about that. I am an only child. And as it is, I was leaving home, flying the nest. And they were like, if you go to Hong Kong, we know no one there. There's no backup. So in
Yeah.
London, we have
I get it.
family, we've got friends. So if anything were to happen, there will be backup. So I actually literally changed my mind on the flight that was heading out, taking us to training. And on that flight, I said,
Oh, wow.
yes, I said, oh, I think I'll do London. I'll go to London instead. And funnily enough, this was back in 1995 when I joined. In year 2020, shortly after the pandemic, all the foreign bases except for London were shut down. Literally every single other base that existed outside of the United States was shut down, and London survived. We are at the moment the only international base. Had I been in Hong Kong, I wouldn't have had a job at this point.
Yeah.
So whatever happens for the best. And my parents sort of guided me towards that. And also, very big thing, I wouldn't have met my husband if I'd been in
Yeah.
Hong Kong.
I know.
So it all happened for the best. So I am really pleased that I did pick London. And I'm very happy to be working here because my colleagues are like my family. We're a very small base. We all know each other. We've seen each other through weddings and divorces and children and, children's weddings. And so all of that. And it doesn't feel like going to work. It just feels like I'm just going for a nice little jolly with my friends,
I have a question for you about your kids because I've always wondered this about my own family and friends who married foreign nationals and then ended up living in foreign countries and raising their children there. Now, of course, it's not strange because it's, these are your children and this is your family and this is your tribe. But, your children are British.
They are.
Whereas you grew up in India. So even if you
Yes.
feel like, okay, I've been in Britain a long time, you're still removed from that. You're one step removed from that. Whereas they are fully British and India is a place they visit. I'm sure they feel comfortable there. They love their family, but they're British. So what's that
Yes.
like?
It's strange and it's interesting. Now, my husband is second generation Indian. So it was his parents who emigrated to the UK. But he's had a very strong connection to India. His father worked for Air India, so he went back to India a lot. And he loves India. So although my children are British and have British passports and have grown up here, they have a very strong connection to India. We go every year. My dad still lives there, so they go visit their grandfather. They also are hugely connected to India through Bollywood. I mean, that has been their staple diet.
God, yeah,
Those
absolutely.
Bollywood. My daughter the other day, and by the way, my kids are not that young. They're 25 and 21, and they've not flown the nest yet. In fact, both of them have returned to the nest. So my 25-year-old the other day, she was cooking her own food, and she had a Bollywood playlist on Spotify. And it was song after song after song. And I thought, wow, I said, you're playing some really nice songs there. She said, Mommy, I've got 76 songs on this playlist. And it goes on and on.
God.
And I thought,
Oh, great.
wow. And they weren't just latest songs. They were songs from the 50s, the Music that she's been exposed to all her life. And in
I
Yeah,
love
some
that
way,
playlist.
me too.
that's just lodged inside of her. So I think, yeah, you can take the girl out of India, but you can't take India out of the girl. Certainly not with me. And in some small way, even my girls have it. So yeah, they're a little bit of both, I would say.
Is your husband, does he work for an airline too?
Yes, this is his office.
Oh,
Can you see the planes?
yes, yes, yes. Oh, wow.
Yes.
So was that difficult to arrange as you were raising your kids?
Yes and no. And so there's two parts to that story.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
I
This
know
is
you're
too
happy.
That's fine. That's just normal in a chat, isn't it? Kids coming in and all that. There are two parts to that story. The fact that you said arrange triggered something in me. So I have to tell you this. My
Yeah.
husband and I, our marriage was arranged. We have had an arranged
Oh, wow.
marriage. Yeah. And now the story behind that is that while I was living in India, there was a family that we knew very well who lived a street behind us. And they were very close to my husband's family. They'd seen him grow up, they'd seen me grow up. And they always said, these two would make a great match. Neither of us
I
was
love that.
interested. Neither
I
of us
know.
was interested. So
Yes.
he used to come to India and he would sort of walk the long way round so that he didn't have to walk past my house because he'd heard about me and he was sick of
He's
hearing
like, I'm
about
not
me.
meeting her.
He had no intention.
Oh my God.
And then likewise for me, I'd keep hearing about him and I'd say, I'm not interested. I don't want to go abroad. I want to live here. I've got my friends here, my family here, my life is here. Well, lo and behold, 5 years down the line, I end up in the UK. At this point, they sort of turn up that pressure a little bit saying, hey, how about you two meet up? Nope, not interested, not interested. We dodged each other for as long as we could. And then when we finally met each other, we saw what everybody else had been seeing all along, that we were perfect for one another. And, it was
That's
just,
wrong. That's
it
a
was
great
just
love story.
timing. It was just timing.
I have to, if I can interject with a little love story that I was told. It's about an arranged marriage. And I think it's like just one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever heard. And your story is right up there with it.
Mm-hmm.
This woman I knew, she reached out to me. I actually didn't know her. She was a reader of my blog and I had written an essay about love and she reached out about her grandparents who were Armenian and they were also in an arranged marriage and they were married very young. She was maybe 16. He was probably 19.
Wow.
They were very, very young.
Yeah.
And she'd been incredibly close to her family. And so this was a devastating event for her. She was just beside herself. This, 16-year-old girl. She spent 16-year-old girl. He'd go off to work. She would sob all day long and, just barely get it together to make his dinner and like bring it to him. And she'd just be holding it together. And every time he moved, she would like jump, in the house. And one day, I don't know how long it was in the marriage, maybe a couple months, something like that. She was sobbing while he was away at work. And she had a moment of clarity that maybe this wasn't so great for him either. He's away from his family. He's doing everything he's supposed to be doing. He's going to work. He's supporting her. She's doing what she's supposed to be doing, but he comes home to a wife who clearly doesn't want to even be in the same room with him and has been, her face is blotchy. She's been crying all day. So she vowed from that moment on that everything she did for him, she would do it with as much love as she could possibly muster, whether it was making his tea or sewing a button or whatever it was. And they fell deeply in love and really quickly, like within like a couple of weeks. And they became the gold standard for the whole family. And they would still gaze into each other's eyes when they were like 85 years old and they were still holding hands. And this woman said, it was like the gift that kept on giving because people always remark about how many happy marriages, genuinely happy marriages there are in her family of people who just want to be together. And she said, that's because my grandparents told us this story. And before we got married, we would always say, I promise that whatever I do, I will do with as much love for you as I can possibly muster, no matter how small. And I thought that was just the greatest story.
It's so lovely. That is really, really lovely. Yes. And I remember prior to my getting married, my father-in-law took me aside and he said, if you look at a carriage, he says, there are two wheels to it. And those wheels have to run together. They have to move together. He said, you and your husband are those two wheels. You must learn to move together. Otherwise, that carriage
Yeah.
will not move. And I've held
Yeah.
on to that lesson as well, because truly it's love and it's being together and being in each other's corners. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a lovely story.
I love these stories. Can't relate to any of them. I do. I'm actually really, which this may not seem logical, but I'm actually, even though you hear horror stories, I'm a fan of arranged marriage.
I
Done
am too.
Like,
right.
Yeah,
Done
I don't have a
right.
problem with them.
Yeah.
Done
Yeah.
right. Exactly. It
yes,
can
Yeah.
be awful.
yes, yes.
Not
But I mean,
not
I used to have a blanket offense to it, if you will,
Mm-mm. Mm.
But that's also because in my culture growing up, I only heard of, well, first off, I think there were some marriages that were arranged, but they didn't frame them as such, right? Like my culture, they didn't really talk about arranged marriage in that same way.
Mhm.
And when I did hear about it, I usually heard about more like, really young girls getting sold off, like that kind of thing. But
Yes.
that does happen.
Yes, that does. And
It does.
sadly, that's the narrative that most people hear, and the sort of
Yeah,
arranged marriage that I'd had, or other friends of mine, it was not so much the fact that, you put a boy and girl together and say, that's it, you get married, gun to the
right,
head.
right.
None of that. It's more about, we've done all the background work. We've done the background checks. Family is great. The boy is solid. He's got a
Yeah,
good job. He can support you. Now it's about whether the two of you, and okay, the values are all aligned, everything. Now it's about the two
yeah,
of you. Do you have that chemistry? Can you get along? Do you think you can make this work? And if you can, that's how we proceed, right? I mean, nobody said to me, if you don't get married to him, that's it. We're gonna lock you up
right,
or do something
Yeah.
drastic. It wasn't like that. It was almost like you're putting two people together, maybe friends who get to say, hey, I've got a friend who's single, you're single, let's get you together. It was like that.
right.
And
Yeah.
and of course, I mean, it took them nearly 5 years to get us together, but eventually when they did, we realized that what they'd been saying all along was true. It's just that we didn't want to subscribe to that narrative. We didn't want to become, like one of those typically boring young people who settle for what their parents want. But in actual fact, it was the best thing because everybody was happy. The parents were happy, the family
Well,
was
it's like,
happy. Yeah.
you're so right. It's like being set up by good friends who are like, hey, I know somebody who'd be perfect for you, which is what, at least from what I'm reading, is what a lot of younger people are now starting to do. They're starting to kind of back away a little bit from the dating apps and such, and
Hmm.
they're trying to
Thank
meet
God.
people through, yeah, exactly, because that's a resume, and that doesn't mean that you can't meet someone online. Of course you can. There are plenty of successful ships that happen that way, but at the same time, it's sort of like swipe. I mean, but it's a resume. It's not. You're not getting that feeling, and it's
Exactly.
a lot harder. And when you meet someone through people, they're vetted.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have I thought about, like, if I'm going to, hook up, I don't mean hook up, I mean, connect a couple of people, and like invite them over for dinner and connect two single people. I mean, I really think about it. I'm like, would these people get along? It's not just these are two great people. Of course they
Mm,
are, but that doesn't mean that they want to go out together. That
I've
doesn't
had
mean
exactly.
that they share
horrible
the same
connections.
values.
I've
Exactly.
had when people have tried to set
Yeah.
me up, it's been horrible.
Oh,
Oh.
I mean,
I'm a
really,
setup.
really horrible.
Oh
But
my.
part of it, like what you're explaining too, is like the time had to be right.
Yes, definitely.
You know,
Yeah.
like you guys
Definitely.
had to connect on your own timeline where you were,
Mhm. Because I
and
do
it could have been
believe,
really different had you done it at 18, like
exactly.
had you made that commitment.
For sure.
Exactly. I mean, had I met him 5 years prior, I don't think we would have hit it off the way we did. We just had to be at that right
Yeah.
juncture in our lives to say, hey, I think this is going to work. It wouldn't have worked 5 years prior. It wouldn't have. He was probably too immature. I wasn't ready to settle down. So, yes, all those factors do come in as well.
You know what's really interesting too? Like, and I don't know if this is culturally, and when I say culturally, I don't even mean like Indian versus Italian versus Czech versus American. I don't mean that way. I mean more I don't know what I mean. We can figure that out in a minute.
Mhm.
But, I'm thinking of there's an Indian family that we're friends with. And when I look at the husband and wife, I love them as a couple and I love them individually. Like both of them are great. And their love story is that they came to the US to go to grad school. I think somebody's brother knew the other person, something like that, or were roommates or
Mhm.
whatever. And it's a brother that hooked them up. And
Ah.
maybe that comes from their culture. I don't know. But like, I look at my brother. My brother was like, hands off my sister. I don't care who you are. Like, he would never make
Mm.
an introduction like that. But I also don't know if it's because of the way he valued or didn't value marriage, although he's been
Mhm.
in a happy marriage for decades. But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like, I've never had a family member. Well, when I have had a family member try to like hook me up with somebody, it's been like, I do not understand this connection at all.
And I
I do
think you
not
have
understand
said
it.
the
You
right
know?
thing. I think it's the value that is assigned to marriage, but also in terms of the way the Indian society functions. If the introduction is made through a family member, whoever, the man in that instance cannot afford to mess up. He cannot afford to,
Mm,
mess around with this girl because everybody in society will know then, right? And that will ruin the reputation of the family, his family, because they'll say, look at what your son did. So there is still a
Yeah.
lot of value that's assigned to that, to your family reputation, your family name, to how you conduct yourself in society. And, it's not just about,
in the US, we're
yeah,
totally individualistic.
right,
Like,
right.
being so
Yeah.
individualistic, it's like, I wanna do whatever, so if I screw this up, I
Yeah.
screw this up.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah, the right
interesting.
incentives have to be there. I mean, even, with the Armenian story that I told when she had her moment of clarity, part of that was, I'm not getting out of this.
Mm-hmm.
This is my life. I
Yeah,
have to make it work.
yeah.
And I mean, Janet and I were talking the other day, before my husband and I got married, because we had kind of come from not very good marriages, not our
Mm-hmm.
marriages, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
our families.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, we are not getting divorced. We're going to figure out how to make this work. We're going to learn how to communicate with each other and make sure to talk to each other about things, because that's just not an option.
Yeah. And I think
And
That's what I
those,
thought. Yeah.
yeah.
I know, it doesn't always work. It's true. It all
No.
kind of depends on the people involved and the incentives, and it's a mix. It's such a
And it is a
boutique
Well, and
gamble.
experience
mental
for
illness.
everyone. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Oh my God,
But
yeah.
marriage is a gamble, and no one who enters
It's
into
total
marriage
gamble.
starts out thinking, hey, this isn't going to work. All of us want it to work.
No.
But then life
Yeah.
throws different things at you, and
Hmm.
and in some cases it doesn't work, and you have to walk away from it, and
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. There's no shame attached to that, because you have to do what is right in that moment. In our case, we were blessed, we were lucky that we are very similar in the way we think, in our values, and all of that. And answering the second part of your question, Janet, I don't think I could have done this job if it weren't for my husband, because he was such a pillar of support for me, especially after I had the kids. We juggled everything between us. I flew weekends, and he worked during the week, and for years we didn't have any time together as a couple. And for
Oh,
years
wow.
I missed out on
Yeah.
family holidays. I wasn't here for Christmas, I wasn't here for Diwali, I wasn't here for birthday parties. But that was the sacrifice we chose to make. And now we look back, and that time's gone so fast. While we were in the throes of it, it seemed like, how long will this carry on for? But today
Forever.
we're making the most of the time we have together. Yeah, exactly. Our girls are older. We go away on holidays. We have our weekend breaks. We do all of those things. But it took this much time to get to this point, you know? And
Right.
one of the things that I remember my husband saying very clearly was that his father was a very traditional man, and he had a stay at home wife. And it was quite jarring for him to have a young woman come into the family who not only wanted to work, but did a job which took her away from home
Mm.
for extended periods of
Yeah.
time. And it was only
Mhm.
because my husband stood there like a pillar and said, no, she can do what she wants. I want her to have this life. And he never let any strain show in front of his father. Because if that had happened, the
Wow.
answer would have been, oh, well, she needs to quit and stay home. But he never did. He
Right.
juggled it all. He kept it all going. And the fact that I've made it to 30 years in this profession is in a huge part thanks to him. So I'm very grateful,
Do you
you know.
bring this into your stories? Do you
Yes,
bring this into your stories?
as in having a supportive husband.
The supportive husband and just, even the arranged marriage or something akin to
Mm,
that, maybe not
yes,
formally
yes,
so. Like, how much do
yes.
you bring your personal life, which is super interesting to me? How much do you bring that into your
A
stories
lot,
at the micro level rather than
a
just like
lot.
straddling east and west?
No, a lot. I think one of my most personal stories and personal books was A Quiet Dissonance. And that was the first novel I ever wrote, actually. And I didn't know what I was doing. I'd been writing short stories up until that point. And I literally winged this book. And I think because it came from such a deep place and within me, and it was so authentic and truthful, it resonated with a lot of people. Although the story was very much about an Indian woman trying to find her feet in a small English village, lots of parallels here. It did do well because I think the story was very real. And yes, and I that was and what since then, of course, I've written various other books. And as you both know, you're both writers, right? You're both authors. You know, you put some of yourself into everything. But as my
Yeah.
books and my stories have evolved, so have I. And I think they're parallel tracks. So what I'm writing today will represent who I am today. What I wrote
Yeah.
5 years ago was who I was back then. So yes, I do pour a lot of myself into my stories, into my books. That's for sure.
I don't know if you have this experience, but when I go back, anytime that I've gone back and I've read bits from, say, my first novel, I don't remember writing that.
Oh, I know.
I feel like I'm reading a story written by a different author. I don't feel like I'm reading something that I wrote,
Yeah, very
which
much
is a
so.
really strange out of body experience because
Hmm.
I think that if you're not a writer, you wouldn't understand that.
True.
You think, what do you mean you didn't know you wrote that? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Are you
yeah,
insane?
yeah.
And
I
I'd be like, no, I really don't.
I only feel that or felt that way when I went back to my diaries from the 90s.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah,
And that was a
Yeah,
diary. It wasn't even a fiction, right? And you
I
read it and
know.
you're like, was this me? You know?
yeah,
I j
yeah.
I
It's amazing what we retain, because sometimes something
It's
really
amazing what we block.
important doesn't get, yeah, exactly, doesn't get retained.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then, we might remember some minutia, some detail that,
Yeah.
Hmm.
what do you mean I wore a red dress? Who cares? You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean?
Yeah.
yeah,
Something like
yeah.
that,
Yeah, I think memories are like that, aren't they? They can be quite selective in a way, if that's the right word. But I think as well that sometimes our mind suppresses stuff that doesn't serve us, things that
Yeah.
perhaps don't help us to grow. I mean, it's there, it's always there, but it's just you forget it for that moment. And then when you read it, you think, oh, yes, that did happen. And I think writing in that sense is just pure catharsis. I mean, you can. My daughter sometimes talks. My 25-year-old, she's doing psychology, and she keeps talking about therapy. And she says, "Mom, I think you need therapy and for this and for that." And I say, you know what, darling, I understand what you're saying, and I know where you're coming from. But for me, writing is my therapy. That's how I
Yeah,
deal
me
with
too.
my emotions and I deal with what's been going on in my life. So I think that as we evolve as people, so does our writing. So it's almost like going back and visiting a stranger when you go back to what you wrote in the early days.
That's it. And I think it underscores what you just said. It is like therapy. And once you've gone through that cycle of therapy, you may not need to revisit it. I mean, that's something you've been through right now, Janet, with your memoir. You're like, I need this off my desk. I am exercising this demon. And I, I do think that it's often, even unless you have a really good therapist, that it's better than most therapy because a lot of times too, people really fixate on their problems and they don't know how to move on from them and they don't build resilience.
Mm-hmm.
It's been awesome having you and chatting with you. I feel like we
It has.
could blab on and on, but that's what this is. It's just conversation among friends.
It's a blab. And it's also, We just want to talk about the things that don't make it into our books, the things that we have to cut away, the things that
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can't explain through our stories, but that inform them, and that
Yes.
without that, there's kind of part of the spine of what we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, and there's so little that actually, because obviously you're serving a story at that point, so it has to have all the beats, and it has to have, you know, things happening, and external conflicts and internal conflicts and all that. But life in and of itself is so rich and so varied and so nuanced, and you can't put everything into
Yes.
a book. So yes, our
No.
experiences, mean a lot. And like you said, that's what makes the backbone of any good stories.
Well, that's our show. Find resources and more at zenandtheartofselfpublishing.com. I'm Janet, and I'll see you next time. Until then, take a deep breath, trust your work, and keep writing.